this year as well, so don't forget, if you have some extra money, to put it in the boxes and just mark it Chest of Joash, or use one of the envelopes that are provided in the back. That's all the announcements I have this evening. We'll go ahead and start in Joshua chapter 6 with verse, and we'll read on through verse 5 before we stop. So this is a passage I'm sure you're all very familiar with. So Jericho was tightly shut because the sons of Israel. No one went in, and no one went out, and no one came in. The Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have given Jericho into your hand, with its king and the valiant warriors. You shall march around the city, all the men of war circling the city once. You shall do so for 6 days." So for 6 days they were to walk around the city one time. Also, 7 priests shall carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. Then on the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. It shall be that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people will go up every man straight ahead. So after 40 years of wandering aimlessly about, the children of Israel have crossed the Jordan, and they are now encamped outside of Jericho. And this, of course, was where the spies went, and this is where Rahab protected them from the citizens of the city of Jericho, and allowed them to sneak out safely and return back to give their information to Joshua. At this point, the city of Jericho is very aware of the presence of the Israelites, and they have sealed up the city, and no one is allowed to go out, and no one is allowed in. Now, God gives instructions to Joshua to then give to the people, and He tells them that He's going to miraculously give the city over to them, because it is a walled and fortified city. And they're they're definitely not equipped to deal with that. So, here we go. I don't know what's going on. I thought we had it fixed. It worked for a week or 2. All right, so God had promised Abraham the land 400 years earlier. So don't forget, this is the promised land, the land that God promised Abraham. And He promised him that land where they're at now 400 years earlier. The time has now arrived for them to possess the land. Now, before we get too far into this account, first thing is that in these 5 verses, you see how God is testing their faith. He's going to give them some instructions which to them will seem maybe just a little bit silly. They're going to spend 6 days encamped around the city. Every day they're going to get up and they're going to make one full circuit on foot marching around the city. On the 7th day, they're going to get up and they're going to march around the city 7 times. And on the 7th time around, they're going to blow these trumpets that God instructed them to blow. And whenever they blow the loudest blast at the end of the 7th circuit, they're all going to shout as loud as they can. And God promises them that if they do that, He will make the walls of the city fall down. That's a little bit of a test of faith, isn't it? They're going to have to believe that God is telling them the truth and that God has the power to make those walls fall down. And if they do that, if they believe and do that, then God will make the walls fall down. And that's exactly what does wind up happening. Now, a lot of people object to the way they possess the land. And you'll see this in verse 21. We'll get to it again later on, but let me read it real quick. They utterly destroyed everything in the city, both man and woman, young and old, and ox and sheep and donkey with the edge of the sword. They went into the city after the walls fell, and they, as they were instructed by God, killed everything. Killed everything. Not just people, but animals as well. They killed all the people, young and old, male and female, and they killed all the animals because God had commanded them to do so. And people object to that. They get upset with that, and they claim that that wasn't right. But God tells us, as He told them in Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 4, exactly why these people are being destroyed. In Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 4, He gives a warning to the Israelites. Do not say in your heart when the Lord your God has driven them out before you. And He's talking as a general rule here about all the tribes of the Canaanites, all the people of that region. They are all equally guilty before God of abominable sinfulness. And so He tells the Israelites, now don't you go getting proud. Don't say in your heart when the Lord your God has driven them out before you, because of my righteousness, the Lord has brought me in to possess this land. So he warns the Israelites not to believe or to say that it's because they're righteous and good that God is giving them the land. God's not giving them the land because they're righteous and good. They're not. They are sinners. But he tells them, there's a reason I'm destroying these people. It is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is dispossessing them before you. So the wickedness of the Canaanites had risen up, and God noticed. He always notices. He knows everything. But let's put it a different way. God is deeply offended by the things they've been doing. Deeply offended. Much like Sodom and Gomorrah, He is deeply offended by the way in which they live their lives and the things that they do. Verse 5 says, it's not for your righteousness or for the uprightness of your heart that you are going to possess their land. So it has nothing really to do with Israel. Again, even to this day, there is animosity between the Jewish people and the people of the region. And that animosity has been ongoing for thousands of years. But really, the issue is between the people and God. God is the one who judged them and found them guilty of abominable practices and has been punishing them ever since because they have refused to repent and come to Him. But it's because of the wickedness. Again, reminding the Israelites, it's not because of anything good in you, it's because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord your God is driving them out before you, in order to confirm the oath which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What's fascinating to me about Deuteronomy 9, 4, and 5 is it's just often overlooked when people study the Promised Land and the occupation of the Promised Land. There's a reason God promised Abraham this land. Because He knew when He made the promise that He was going to drive these people out. And He knew exactly why He was going to drive these people out. And it was a land then that He was going to give to His people. But He reminds them, it's not because of your righteousness or your goodness. I'm not giving you the land because you're righteous and good. I'm giving you the land because I'm going to wipe these people out. You can either be my instrument, or I'll do it another way, but the people that possess these lands had come up against a God they could not overcome, but would instead overcome them. And you've probably heard the arguments, because you'll hear it today in modern times, where people will talk about, I love the one the other day I was listening to. They were on a college campus and they were debating, and they referred to the Jewish people as colonizers, which I find is an interesting point of view. If you know what a colonizer is, it's someone who dispossesses someone else from their land. But the Israelites did not colonize the Promised Land. God drove the people out. That was God's decision. It was God's action. And if it hadn't been the Israelites, trust me, it would have been someone else. If it hadn't been the Israelites, it would have been the Persians or the Babylonians. It would have been someone else. God would have used someone to drive these people out or to basically exterminate them. And people don't like those terms, but we have to come to grips with this reality. God hates sin. And if you don't believe that God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, I got another thing coming to you. God absolutely destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah because He rained hellfire down upon it from above. He rained it down, and it burned and consumed everything in that city, leveled it flat. Between the hailstones and the fire burning upon them, it was gone. So God drove them out, and that's what the Bible teaches. And it teaches this in multiple places. Exodus 23, 32 through 33, you shall make no covenant with them or with their gods. They shall not live in your land, because they will make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. And if you look in Leviticus 18, 24 through 30, he tells us exactly what these people were guilty of, why it was He was going to destroy them. It had to do with things like idolatry. Of course, we know they were idol worshippers, but it goes even deeper than that. In Leviticus, he accuses them of incest, adultery, homosexuality, bestiality. He mentions child sacrifice as something they were guilty of in their worship of their idols. In Deuteronomy 18, verses 9 through 11, he accuses them of divination, witchcraft, reading of omens and mediums, in which they were attempting to talk to the dead. But as we know, they were actually talking to demonic spirits. So again, these are the things that God accuses the Canaanite people of doing. The citizens of Jericho being a part of the Canaanite people. And so He was going to destroy them one way or another. He just chooses to give the land to a people that he chose in advance to give it to, and to use those people to drive them out of the land, or to be his partner, if you will, in driving them out of the land, because he's going to do all the heavy lifting. He's the one who's going to knock the walls of Jericho down, not the Israelites. They're just then going to go in and finish up what God has already started. So he goes on, and we get down into verse 12. Skipping down just a little bit to Joshua 6, verse 12. Now Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord, went on continually and blew the trumpets. And the armed men went before them, and the rear guard came after the ark of the Lord, while they continued to blow the trumpets. Thus the second day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did so for 6 days. So we see they actually did what God told them to do for the first 6 days. They heard God, they believed Him, and they did exactly as He had told them to do. And they continue to do what God told them on the 7th day. Because it tells us that on the 7th day they rose early at the dawning of the day and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. So on the 7th day they make 7 circuits around the city in the exact same fashion as they did once a day for the first 6 days. Only on that day they marched around the city 7 times. At the 7th time, when the priest blew the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." And so at that point, they shouted just as they had been instructed. And so Joshua led them to do exactly as God had commanded. And so they marched 7 times around the city. They blew the trumpets. On the final round and the final trumpet blow, Joshua said to the people, "Shout just as God has commanded us to do." And then we get this strange break in the passage. So if you look at the structure, we have verses 12 through 16 that basically tell us they do exactly as God has commanded them to do. And then we have sort of a transition period as we get into verse 17. And he goes back and almost like information that should have been in there, or it probably was given to them earlier, and I assume he told them this before they started shouting, because I'm not sure they would have heard these instructions if he gave them while they were shouting. So this is something I think that they already knew, and the writer just put this in to let us know. So they're going to destroy everything, and he makes it clear, something that he says at the beginning of this, "The city shall be under the ban. It and all that is in it belongs to the Lord." Now what that means is they were fully aware when they shouted and then the walls came down that when they went into the city they were not allowed to take anything for themselves. Everything belonged to God, and what was banned was them acquiring anything from the city for themselves. And we'll get into how this actually works. There's only going to be one exemption to complete destruction. Well, there's 2 actually. So let's look at the first exemption. There's 2 exemptions to destroying everything in the city. The first is only Rahab the harlot and all who are with her in her house shall live. And he gives the reason, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. So the only persons, the only people who are going to survive are Rahab and her family. And in order for them to be counted with her, they have to be in her house. And that's exactly what the spies told her. Remember that everyone that she wanted to shield had to be in her home, and then she had to tie that ribbon outside so that the people coming in would know not to go in that house and kill the occupants. And so she's only able to protect her family if they believe her and trust her and enter into her house as well. So everyone in that house will live. That's the first exception to the ban. The second, "But as for you, only keep yourselves from the things under the ban, so that you do not covet them and take some of the things under the ban." So on top of that, they're not allowed to take anything for themselves, but there are some things that they are allowed to take out of the city. So they're banned from taking these things from themselves, because if they do, they will make the camp of Israel accursed and bring trouble on it. Now, does somebody ignore that? Yeah, we'll probably get to that in a few weeks. We'll go through that as well. That's another part of the passage. There is someone who doesn't actually listen to these instructions and sees all the silver and gold and bronze and iron, decides to take some for himself, and then causes trouble for the whole camp. All of Israel suffers because of this individual's sin. So again, you see here the clear warning. This is a warning that was given to Joshua, that Joshua relayed to the people. So before the walls fell, they were aware of this. They knew when they went in that no one was allowed to live except for the people in Rahab's house, and that they were not to take anything out of the city except the silver, gold, articles of bronze and iron. They could not take those things for themselves because, as he explains, all the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord. So these are things that are set aside for God's use. So these things are to be kept, not to be taken by the people for themselves. So if they take this, in essence, what they're doing is they're stealing from God, because these items were already marked off by God for Himself. And there's a reason for that, and we'll get into that probably later on. But it has to do with tabernacle and then temple and all these different things. So the beginning of the accumulation of the necessary items. Also for the fact that people would need some money. So part of this is going into the treasury that the Lord would oversee, because they are at this point a theocracy. A theocracy is a nation ruled by God. So God is their provider and their protector. And this is one of the ways in which God would provide for them as they entered into the promised land. So that's some of the reasoning behind it, but clearly they are told not to take any of these things for themselves, and that's probably the most important point. Nothing in this city is going to benefit the children of Israel directly, at least not on an individual level. And there's only going to be one group of survivors, and that will be Rahab and her family. And she's only being spared because she put her faith in God rather than the idols that her people worship. So notice here, again, it's another test of faith. They had a test of faith in that they had to circle the city and blow the trumpets. They had to shout at the right time on the seventh day. And then God would make the walls fall. And then He's going to test their faith again as He challenges them not to get caught up in the things they're going to see with their eyes, not to spare anyone or take any slaves for themselves or any animals for themselves either. And they're not to touch the silver, the gold, the bronze, and the iron, because that all belongs to the Lord. And there is a ban against them. If they do that, then they will bring a curse not only upon themselves, but upon all the people as well. So again, it's a test of faith to see if they will believe God, trust God, and then obey God. Joshua chapter 6, verse 20, as we move on. So the people shouted, and the priests blew the trumpets. And when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight ahead, and they took the city. So they do exactly what God said. They do it exactly the way God told them to do it. And at the end of doing that, the wall fell down and they rushed into the city. Verse 21, they utterly destroyed everything in the city. We read this earlier, both man and woman, young and old, and ox and sheep and donkey, with the edge of the sword. So that's the verse we read earlier. They did. They slaughtered everyone. Joshua said to the two men who had spied out the land, go into the harlot's house and bring the woman and all she has out of there, as you have sworn to her. So just as you promised her, you go in and you make sure that her and hers get out alive. And so they go in to make sure that happens. So the young men who were spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brothers and all she had. They also brought out all her relatives and placed them outside the camp of Israel. So not only is Rahab spared, but her entire family is spared. At least all of those who entered into her house as she directed, they were all spared from the slaughter that was going on within the city. Verse 24, they burned the city with fire and all that was in it, only the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. So again, they didn't take anything for themselves, but they did take everything of value out of the city, all the silver, gold, bronze, and iron, and all of that went into the treasury of the house of the Lord. Verse 25, however, Rahab the harlot and her father's household and all she had, Joshua spared, and she has lived in the midst of Israel to this day. So again, we get into these interesting little things that are tucked into passages. One of the interesting things about the chronicling of Joshua's life is that Joshua wrote probably almost all of it, except for the very end. And then whoever was writing the Chronicles, whoever God chose to use, finishes after his death, of course. But we know this because it's told that she lived in the midst of Israel the rest of her life. So this person who's writing knows that she is living amongst the people of Israel because they know who she is, and they're aware that she's still alive because she's still there to that day. So again, it gives you an idea of the timing of the writing, because some people who want to discredit the Bible will claim that books were written way after the events, like hundreds of years, and therefore they probably got a lot of things wrong. pretty obvious, just that little nugget, just kind of tucked in there. It's not even a major point in the passage, but it's just there, like somebody who was writing then would write as they were led by the Spirit of God to write. And the Spirit of God gives us these little clues, or these little tip-offs, if you will, that explain to us exactly when the book was written. It was written during Joshua and Rahab's lifetimes, because this person knows who she is and knows where she lives. She lives amongst the Israelites to this day. And again, it's because of her act of faith, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Again, she put her faith in God rather than the idols of her people. All right. So they did do what God commanded. They did everything exactly the way they were told. As silly as it may have seemed to them at the time, they marched around the city once a day for 6 days. They blew the trumpets. On the seventh day, they marched around the city 7 times. They blew the trumpets really loud at the end. They all shouted, and the wall fell down. And then everything seems to be going really well. They did exactly as God told them to do. They went in. They did not take any slaves or any captives. They did not take any of the animals for themselves, it appears, as we read through this. The gold, the silver, the bronze, and the iron, they did not take for themselves. They brought it all to the house of the Lord to go into the treasury of the house of the Lord. So then verse 26, then Joshua made them take an oath that day, saying, cursed before the Lord is the man who rises up and builds this city, Jericho. With the loss of his firstborn he shall lay its foundation. With the loss of his youngest son he shall set up its gates. So God was with Joshua, and that's very obvious. We'll see that in the next verse. In fact, let's read verse 27. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was in all the land. So it's clear that God is with Joshua. He gives Joshua these directions. Joshua, being a man of faith, as we already know, followed God's instructions to the best of his abilities, and God rewarded him and blessed him and made his name great, so that people who were his enemies feared him, and the people of his nation, by and large, loved him. They appreciated his faith and his leadership. But I love verse 26, because to me it's one of those verses you really got to take a moment and think about. As I read through this, I find it a little bit difficult to decipher as far as how far out this goes. So he pronounces to the people. Now, my first question is he talking primarily to Rahab and her family? Or is he talking to the Israelites? Or is he saying this for the benefit of everyone? The Rahab and her family, the Israelites, and the people of the surrounding tribes that are still in portions of the Promised Land. I think he's telling this because it's coming from God. He's telling everyone this. Anyone who will listen is given this message. So it's both the Israelites, Rahab and her family, and any of the people in the surrounding areas that are part of the Canaanite tribes. So I think the ones taking an oath are probably Rahab and her family and the Israelites. Of course, you're not going to be able to make the Canaanite tribes take an oath, and they probably wouldn't be willing to anyway, but it's also a warning to them. But he's making all of the people of Israel. Is Rahab and her family now part of Israel? Yeah, they are. They're now part of Israel. So as he does this, he would be explaining to all the Israelites, including her and her family, that God is not going to allow anyone to rebuild Jericho. They never did rebuild Jericho. Yes. Yes. That's a good point. I had seen that. The latest archaeological studies, they do believe they have located the ruins of Jericho. And as you said, the walls, if nobody heard, the walls in the excavation fell out, not in. So they found the city foundation, and then they started to move out and study it, and they found that the walls, the stones from the walls, were outside the city. So that means they fell out. And that it creates, as you said, sort of a staircase system that the children of Israel could basically just walk up and in. So the walls literally fell out and created a scenario where they could just easily walk in. The thing about it is the way God did it, and the way archaeology proves that God did it, He made it so easy for them. The people inside the city, the soldiers, mostly would have been on the walls. Most of the soldiers would have died when the walls fell out. The ones that didn't would have been so disoriented there was probably little to no resistance when the Jewish soldiers entered into the city itself. A lot of people, because a lot of the dwelling places in cities like Jericho were built into the walls as well, a lot of the people died when the walls fell. But the remainder were put to the sword. But he says here, you're not going to ever rebuild this city. No one is going to be allowed to rebuild this city. If you try, it will cost you your own family. That's what he's warning them here. Because of the level of curse that God put on this land and the people of this land, if anyone tries to rebuild this city that God found to be an abomination, it will cost them their family. They'll lose their firstborn when they start. They'll lose their youngest child if they ever do even finish laying the foundation and building the walls. That's pretty serious, isn't it? And no one was ever able to rebuild the city. And I'm sure there were probably some who tried. I mean, some people just don't care what God says, right? There were probably some who arrogantly tried to rebuild Jericho, but no one was ever able to rebuild Jericho. Once God destroyed it, it was never rebuilt. Yes? Oh yeah, they could still live in the area. Right. They just couldn't rebuild the city itself. But yeah, they still lived in the area. That was part of the promised land. So they were allowed to build housing. They could plant vineyards. They could run animals. That was not like an area that was completely off limits. You're right. They just were not allowed to rebuild the city as a fortified, structured city. And based on the archaeological finds, there never really was any significant building in that area again. It was mostly just kind of like farmland and a few housing developments here and there. And they did build housing developments too, without building whole cities. So they had fortified cities, and then they had cities that were not fortified, and then they had sort of agricultural areas, which were just series of houses. Because you have to keep in mind, now, we need to understand this, and this is a good point. I'm glad you brought it up. We need to make sure everybody's clear about this. When they settled in the Promised Land, keep in mind, they didn't have equipment to farm. So farms were really small. You guys, that's an important point for us to understand, because everything was done by hand. So you didn't farm like 100 acres. You farmed 10. Maybe even less. Because I'll tell you what, 10's a handful if you're doing it by hand. Have you ever grown a garden? Yeah. Bill's got a big garden, Bill. You got a big garden. How big's your garden? 100 by 20. I don't even have any idea how much of an acre that is, but I guarantee it's a fraction of an acre. It's a lot of work, isn't it? Yeah. So when you think about their farms were small. So they would live adjacent to their fields. They would grow their crops. They weren't growing crops in 20-acre fields. They were growing crops in like 2- and 3-acre lots. That's how we would think of it, but to them it was a big farm. Now where they pastured sheep, that would be a little bit bigger because they would just move the sheep around and they would graze mostly, and they would move them around. So they still use the region. What they never were able to do is to rebuild the city itself. They were never able to rebuild the city of Jericho. Children of Israel did possess the land. They absolutely possessed the land after that. It was theirs to use as they saw fit, whether it was to pasture sheep, raise crops, build a house or two here and there. They were able to do that, but the city itself was never rebuilt, and that's what the curse was against, that they never again build the city. Also, this is just the beginning. They're going to destroy a lot more cities as they work their way into the Promised Land. They're going to drive out a lot more tribes than just the one that was located in Jericho. So there is something that binds these people together. And when you look at the passages in Leviticus and you look at the passages in Deuteronomy, we're not just talking about an individual city. We're not even really talking about an individual tribe. We use the term Canaanites to describe a much larger group of people. So I often refer to them as the Canaanite tribes. There were a lot of tribes under that umbrella. So the Canaanites were often, if you're thinking about Old Testament-wise, think of everyone who's occupying the promised land when the children of Israel crossed the Jordan. So that's kind of the way in which the term is used in the Old Testament. So you have a lot of different groups, a lot of different tribes under that large umbrella. And the people of Jericho are just the first to fall after the crossing of the Jordan. There will be many, many more as they move their way into the further reaches of the promised land. Question, did they actually possess all of the land that God promised during Joshua's lifetime? No, they did not. And it's not because Joshua didn't want to, it's because they seemed to get a little bit satisfied as they took certain areas. Because after this, a lot of the cities they possess will not be destroyed when they possess them. Remember, God promised you basically be living in houses you didn't build, you'll be living in cities you didn't construct, you'll be benefiting from fields you didn't plant and vineyards you didn't plant, you'll get the fruit from. So part of that is then God fulfilling His promise that a lot of things they would actually receive intact. Anybody have any idea why God would have flattened Jericho as a starting point? Yeah, show His might. Remember, these are people who believe in regional deities. So never forget the mindset. They believe in regional deities. And they often would try to manipulate their deity into opposing another deity. And then the goal was to have the God who was the most powerful or the most intimidating. Well, guess what happened? The God of the Jewish people just became the most intimidating God in the region, didn't he? Because I guarantee Molech never did this, and neither did Baal or Asherah or Ashtoreth. I mean, we could go on down the list of the Canaanite idols. None of them ever leveled a city by the blowing of a horn and the shouting of a group of people. So God is clearly now to them, I'm just looking at the way they think, not the way that reality is, but the way they think, God is now viewed as being more powerful than their regional God. So the God of the Hebrews is more powerful than their God. So what does that do to people who find their strength and courage in their belief in their idol? It causes them to fear. A lot of these people actually began to flee. A lot of them just took up and left. They moved north. So again, they do begin to enter into areas that are not occupied after this. So this sets a stage, it sets a tone that these people are unstoppable because their God is unstoppable. Their God is more powerful than the others. So the people in the more fertile areas, which are the more flat areas, would be more inclined to just abandon their cities and go somewhere else, somewhere where they felt a little safer, or maybe migrate into another tribe. So a lot of these tribes begin to combine in with other tribes, and they begin to find other places to live. Now, not everyone. There will still be some holdouts, and they will have to deal with that. But they're now able then to begin to really possess areas that are still constructed that they can immediately move into and live. Because again, they're still nomadic at this point. They are still living in tents. They're still living in tents. They don't have any cities of their own, and they're now going to get some cities of their own. They're not going to live in Jericho at this point because Jericho's leveled. It's flat. What God didn't knock down, they knocked down and burned because they were commanded to knock it down and burn it. So it was all destroyed during this period. Now they're going to continue to farm the area. They'll probably live in the area, but they're not going to live in Jericho, and God has made it clear that Jericho as a city is not going to be rebuilt. All right, so you kind of see the wisdom of God and the direction that He's going, but never forget, these people are not being driven out because the Hebrew people are more righteous than they are or are righteous on their own. They're being driven out because these people are so wicked and they have reached such a depth of depravity that God says no more. This is not going to continue on any longer. And again, go through that list. You should really, if you haven't done it, you should go through the list in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and look at everything God accuses these people of. It's a pretty staggering list of the things they were doing on a common and regular basis. And so God has said enough's enough. I'm not going to allow this to continue any longer. And He's going to dispossess them from the land, and He's going to do it in miraculous ways. That way He gets the glory, not the Jewish people. He's the one who gets the glory because He's the one who's knocking the walls down, doing all the work. They just have to believe, trust, and obey. So they have to believe God, they have to trust Him, and they have to obey what He tells them to do. So this is one of those cases where, again, faith is tested, but when faith is tested and it actually is real, God blesses and moves in a powerful way. And really, that's to me, as I read Joshua, that's the whole essence of Joshua's life. Joshua believes God, he trusts God, and he does his very best to obey God. And at times, I'm sure Joshua is disappointed because things don't go the way that he thought they would go. But a lot of that is because of the lack of faith of the children of Israel. They really struggle to believe and trust God. So going all the way back to when the first group of spies went in, they come back and all of them are saying, oh, it's not possible. These people are giants. We don't stand a chance. And you got Joshua and Caleb like, let's go do it now. God's going to give it to us. Well, Joshua still believes God's going to give it to him. And by the way, so does Caleb. Because guess who else is still alive? Caleb's still alive. They're the only two, right? Joshua and Caleb are still alive. And they still believe they're going to possess this land. And they are. They're going to possess this land because God is going to give it to them. Sadly, Joshua does not get to possess all the land because the faith of the children of Israel begins to wane as they become satisfied with what they seize to a certain point. And they never actually then go on and seize the rest of what God had promised they could have. All right, so let's close. We'll do prayer requests, and then we'll wrap it up this evening. So you guys do prayer requests, and we'll close.